Well, guys, yeah, you're right. There's Jake the Snake Roberts, and you're listening to Top of the Morning.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Top of the Morning podcast presented by TopRopeReport.com. I'm your host, Eric Ames, and welcome to episode 23 of the show this week. I am joined by TopRopeReport.com columnist and basically the untitled co-host of the show this week, Mr. Doug Berrill, as we review all the happenings in WWE this week with our recap of the Superstar Shakeup. So we go through all the moves for Raw and SmackDown Live, give our opinion on the overall happenings of the shakeup in general, and then break down each and every move individually. So we're not going to waste too much time here, but before we get into that, be sure to check out Doug's column this week, the Doug's Day Device, where he talks about 3 moves during the Superstar Shakeup that he did not like and did like. So for a little more elaboration, be sure to hashtag GetOnTop at TopRopeReport.com to check that out. So without any further ado, here is episode 23 of the Top of the Morning podcast with Mr. Doug Berrill, our review of the Superstar Shakeup. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to review the Superstar Shakeup. And joining me once again this week is the, untitled co-host of the show, my tag team partner, not my life partner, Mr. Doug Berrill. Doug, what's going on, good brother?
It's going pretty good. The weather is getting nicer here. And, we had a interesting shakeup.
Yeah, it's actually starting to get nice up in these parts, so I've gotta have the window open because it gets pretty warm in the old TRR HQ, so hopefully no trains will go by or some stupid bird will land on the window outside, which has been known to happen. I've actually had a bird fly into the window before when it was closed, so that was interesting, made me kind of poke a little turtle head a little bit, so when you don't expect it, that's always interesting, so maybe we'll be lucky and avoid that this time. So like I said, of course, we're reviewing the entire Superstar Shakeup for this past week on Raw and SmackDown Live. Of course, if you've read any of my column, you pretty much know how I feel about it. I was not a fan of the idea at all. It hasn't even been a year since the draft, it's only been 9 months. And I can't take full credit for the wording of this opinion because I got this from Johnny Fashion of the Main Event podcast, but it's basically what I've been saying the whole time. And I feel like this kind of exposes the inability of WWE to kind of create new storylines without having to quote-unquote shake things up and kind of ruin brand integrity. What was kind of your expectation and take heading into this shakeup?
My expectation was that it would happen down the line when it felt like it was needed. It wasn't needed yet. You just came off a WrestleMania who, obviously there are a couple curmudgeons out there who are never going to be happy with no matter what you throw at them. But at the end of the day, WrestleMania was very good. It was a very good WrestleMania. Probably one of the best of the 2010s so far. And really, I mean, whenever I hear anybody say anything negative about it, I'm like, well, name me the worst match on the card and tell me, what was so bad about it. And I'm not saying that you can't name a match that fell short of its mark or whatever. But really, the worst 3 matches on this year's WrestleMania card compared to the worst 3 matches on any other card, that's a good way to gauge it. So you're coming off a really good WrestleMania. WrestleMania usually wraps up a lot of stories, but it also leaves questions to make people want to watch in the future. So there are chapters left with a couple of these stories, and then you go ahead and inevitably add talent. You added the Hardys at WrestleMania. You added the Revival. You added Samson. You added Nakamura and Dillinger. So right now, both shows felt good, and then you threw in all those new guys to freshen it up, even though it wasn't desperate for a freshening up just yet. So it just felt way too soon.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's almost like making a joke about the untimely passing of Charlie Murphy. Way too soon.
Yeah,
I agree with you 100%. I've said this all along, and I wrote extensively about it during the draft last year. I think the addition of more titles plays a big role in things becoming stale, because instead of having a champion hop and work on each show and basically creating that freshness without having to ruin brand integrity and swap a bunch of guys over, it was inevitable. And like I said on the podcast last week when I interviewed your favorite homie JR, who, big shout out to him, because as you said to me, he knew way more than I expected, so that was very refreshing. But I just forgot my point.
Well, JR was a great podcast, so if you haven't listened to it, listen to it. I was very entertained listening to it.
Yeah, I was really impressed with all of his opinions. But yeah, it wasn't needed at all. And like I said with him, my biggest fear is that they're going to do this every single year, and it's going to completely ruin brand integrity, which is the whole point of having a brand split to begin with. Especially if you're going to do it, like I said, it's only been 9 months since the draft. It wasn't needed. You added stars from NXT to keep things fresh, which was kind of, was basically, I guess, a dick tease, for lack of a better term, because, great example, I was really looking forward to The Miz and Shinsuke Nakamura, and now we're not going to get that, so we'll definitely get into that. So we're going to run down all the moves and debuts. The other point I want to make before we get started is I don't like how it was just announced that this guy is going to Raw, and you don't know what the compensation for that was. Like, I was expecting it to be more of like, for example, Apollo Crews has been traded to Raw in exchange for so-and-so. So that makes it a little bit harder to break down. I was kind of hoping we'd be able to look at it as like a, I guess as like a sports general manager kind of a perspective. So they kind of took that away from us too, which...
And it also made SmackDown worse because, you're like, oh, Dean Ambrose is on Raw, so obviously Kevin Owens is going to SmackDown.
Right. That made it very, very obvious some things that were going to happen, which we'll definitely elaborate a little bit more on. So we'll start off with the very first move that was announced before Raw went on the air, which to me made it feel really unimportant, and that is, like I just mentioned, Apollo Crews heading to Raw. So for me, this guy, I don't know what it is, he just can't, he can't seem to get anything going, and I think by moving him to Raw is not going to help him at all. Granted, he might have a little more opportunity to get some TV time, but what's the point if you're not going to have him do anything important? He hasn't shown that he can talk at all. Basically, he's just an athletic body with a great smile, so I don't quite understand removing him from the quote-unquote land of opportunity over to Raw, where the roster is a lot more top-heavy now, and it just doesn't seem like he's going to have much to do.
Yeah, the only thing that he's going to benefit from is the fact that it's a 3-hour show, so like you said, he might get more opportunity to get on TV, but it's kind of a catch-22 because, you called it the land of opportunity, and to be fair, SmackDown has definitely done a better job since the brand split in terms of character development, and so my knee-jerk is like, well, that's his problem. He doesn't have any kind of character. He doesn't have a type of charisma, like you said, other than being the athletic, smiling guy.
I've seen some people say, well, they should turn him heel, but I don't quite understand, why are you going to turn this guy heel when you have no idea if he can even talk? He hasn't even been, like, if he can't get over as a babyface with the look that he has, and, I mean...
The offense that he has.
Exactly, that offense, I don't understand what turning him heel would really do for him.
Right, so it's one of those weird things, because you're like, well, he needs character, so SmackDown might be a better fit, but then again, he's been on SmackDown since July, and he hasn't been able to develop a character or get over. I don't know what the fate of Apollo Crews is. I really don't.
He's one guy that I feel like got called up too early. When he got moved up after WrestleMania last year, I was kind of like, wow, I didn't really expect that coming. I figured he would have stayed in NXT a lot longer. So I think that it was too soon for him, and we're starting to really see that affect him now, because he could have used more time in NXT to really develop a character. He's just another body at this point.
Yeah.
So, of course, the next move for Monday Night Raw, which, I'll be honest, as soon as they opened up the show, I threw my hands up in the air, and I was immediately angry. This was one move that I didn't want to see happen. I won't elaborate too much, because I'll let you lead off with it, and that is The Miz and Maurice going to Monday Nights.
Well, we're recording this on Thursday. It'll be released on a Saturday. My column comes out on Friday, so for us, it comes out tomorrow. For anybody listening, it came out yesterday, so check out TopRopeReport.com. And I definitely mentioned The Miz and Maurice because I talked about 3 moves that I liked and 3 moves that I didn't like. And The Miz and Maurice absolutely did not like. And it's for a couple reasons. One, in terms of brand, you talk about brand integrity, I'm talking about brand identity. And obviously, AJ Styles is the carrier of SmackDown. I was so glad to learn that he's going to stay there. It really, SmackDown really has been the house that Styles built. But when I think of SmackDown Live, I think of AJ Styles. But the next face that pops into my head is The Miz. And, he's had this great year doing some of the best work of his life. And I really identify him with SmackDown. Not only do I identify with him with SmackDown, but he has worked so hard that he could legitimately be back in the title picture. They've done Miz and Randy Orton before, but this is a totally different year, totally different premise.
Totally different character for The Miz as well.
Right. They could have had a completely reinvented feud between Randy Orton and The Miz for the title and have that be kind of the title story leading up into SummerSlam at some point. When he moves to Raw, there's all these guys who are kind of must push. Roman Reigns, Braun Strowman, Seth Rollins, Finn Balor. You got Bray Wyatt who moved to Raw, which we'll get into Wyatt, but you hope that he does well. And so now The Miz goes from not only, for me, identifying him with SmackDown, being one of the main reasons SmackDown has been so good since the brand split, and be due a legitimate, what would be a legitimate, interesting title, program with Randy Orton. And on Raw, this great work that he's been doing, he might just fade into the background.
Yep, I think that is inevitable. Just like you said, I don't see where he fits in. He was doing some of the best work of his career. His segments on Talking Smack were absolutely must-watch, which has been taken away from us now. And I thought for sure that he was due for a top program and main event push, which you just kind of listed off the guys. I definitely don't see that happening for him now. Now he's stuck behind Roman, he's stuck behind Braun, he's stuck behind Rollins, he's stuck behind Brock Lesnar. I mean, I just don't understand where he fits in, and inevitably I think that he's going to be stuck in the mid-card. So I was incredibly displeased with him kicking off Monday Night Raw, and it immediately soured me on the whole shakeup, even though I I was kind of salty about it to begin with, but this kind of reaffirmed my fears of, like, why are you doing this? It wasn't needed at all. Plus, like I said before, I was really looking forward to what might happen with him and Nakamura. Why tease us with that and then immediately remove it? It didn't make any sense to me at all.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, The Miz and Maurice's arrival was immediately followed up with the arrival of the Intercontinental Champion Dean Ambrose. And this is the point where we were about, I don't know, less than 10 minutes into Raw where I threw my hands up and said, F this. I was so unhappy about that. To me, the titles should have stayed where they were. I don't think there was any need for them to move. And much like The Miz, I haven't really seen... I've kind of soured on Dean Ambrose, and I feel like he's gotten stale. So perhaps he will get some fresh rivals by going to Raw. But again, he falls in the same category as The Miz to me, where he's going to be stuck behind all these other guys. And, I mean, who is he going to feud with on Raw? Is he going to be stuck feuding with The Miz again? I don't see where he goes from here.
Yeah, that didn't make any sense, and again, it made SmackDown really predictable. Within 10 minutes of Raw, you knew that Kevin Owens was going to SmackDown, which that makes it kind of boring. I agree that they shouldn't have swapped, but I also go back to WrestleMania because I almost did a column on flipping WrestleMania finishes.
Baron Corbin should have went over.
Baron Corbin should have went over. Not only should Baron Corbin have gone over and then Dean gets his rematch, but and Dean should have stayed on SmackDown, but Dean should have turned heel in a couple months. He's been he was a great babyface for a good solid 2 years. Now this is by far the most uninteresting title run he's had on the main roster, and I sometimes I have to think about it, who's the IC title holder? Oh, right, it's Dean Ambrose. It shouldn't be like that. You should know immediately, who holds each belt because it should be important. This is the most insignificant title run of his career so far. Baron Corbin should have absolutely gone over, get his rematch, turn Dean heel, and then Dean can work with some up-and-coming baby faces, give them a rub, and reinvigorate his character.
Could you imagine a heel Dean Ambrose feuding with Nakamura or even a Ty Dillinger?
That would be wonderful. That would be awesome.
He needs a heel turn to be fresh. I know a lot of people will say, well, Roman needs a heel turn. Ambrose needs it way more, I think.
Yeah, and
and honestly, I don't see it happening on Raw either because a lot of your mid-card guys are heels.
Yeah, and I love the and I know that he's going to now call SmackDown either the same or a similar name, but I love the Kevin Owens show. Raw really has been, for the better part since the brand split. Kevin Owens has been such a big part of Raw. When he calls it the Kevin Owens show, it really has been. He really has made a name. I don't care for this change whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm with you. The only positive that I can kind of pull out of this is perhaps Ambrose will be getting, I guess, some main event matches because we know Brock's not going to be around all the time, which will kind of elevate the status of the IC title for the time being. But I just don't see the point of it. You could have did the same exact thing with the US title, so I mean, I could have lived without it. Moving on, probably, in my opinion, the most irrelevant move out of them all. I mean, I guess that's arguable because there's a couple. But Kurt Hawkins moves to Raw and immediately gets basically buried by the Big Show and clocked within 5 minutes of being on Raw. Honestly, I don't have a lot to say about this. He's been booked so bad since he returned, which, I mean, I kind of had hope that, maybe they might do a little something with him because he's so talented, and they did nothing with him in his previous run. But now I think it's just pretty obvious that they brought him back to basically just be a jobber. So, with this move, I just ask myself, what was the point?
Yeah, if the KO punch was any indication, and his run since he returned to SmackDown is any indication, you're here to be a glorified job guy, which...
Maybe they just wanted to put some fresh faces on main event.
Yeah, right, and if you're going to be a, glorified job guy, I mean, that's fine, but he's capable of doing a little bit more, getting a little more mic time. He is entertaining, and he's talented enough where even if you're gonna use him to put some other guys over, he can have longer matches.
Random thought about Kurt Hawkins. I hate that they changed his entrance music. He had some pretty badass entrance music in his last run, which I'm not sure if you recall. I know you kind of were out of it at that point in time, but I don't think they should have changed that. Not that it really matters with the way that he's been booked.
Sure.
So next up, we actually had a debut, which, if you weren't really paying attention during the Nia Jax and Charlotte Flair match, aside from Nia almost killing Charlotte Flair on a couple of occasions, the crowd was kind of off and looking away from the ring, and if you weren't closely looking, you might not have seen what was going on. But it was actually the Drifter Elias Sampson kind of wandering around, drifting, I guess, through the crowd, which there's been talk of him coming up since last year, which got delayed when he got injured, and then, of course, he lost a Loser Leaves NXT match to Cassius Ohno. Worked under a mask last week on NXT, which was probably the most over he's ever been with the crowd as El Vagabundo, which was pretty funny. But yeah, he didn't really do much. He just kind of wandered around in the crowd and then kind of waltzed out onto the stage during the Hardys match later on in the night. A lot of people don't really like Sampson, but I actually kind of like his gimmick. I think it's different. And I think that he has a chance to kind of make a name for himself in the mid-card. So, again, to me, this is a fresh face that we knew that was coming up, which is just another reason why you didn't need to swap things around. I think I would have preferred him to be on SmackDown Live, just because the mid-card on Raw is so muddled, especially now. But I'm actually a fan of the Drifter, so I'm kind of interested to see what they're going to do. You see, there's something positive from me on this so far, Doug.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there is. You know what? I don't want him on Raw. I don't want him on SmackDown. I want him on both. I want his gimmick to go all the way, and I want him to work both shows, whether he's actually working a match or not. I want him to go all the way with the Drifter.
I thought that there actually was a chance of that happening on SmackDown Live, but then it didn't happen, so, I mean, he's clearly a part of the Raw roster.
Oh, my God. How hilarious would that be if he just, any given time, he just happened to show up? You know, it would really like legitimize his gimmick, and they could do some really funny things with it, you know.
I think it would have made sense, so that's why it didn't happen.
I want him to show up on 205 Live. I don't want him to wrestle on 205 Live. I just want him to drift.
Yeah, just kind of wander around. It totally makes sense, and I think it would have been interesting anyway.
And it would have helped him get over even more.
Yeah, he would have never known when he was going to appear or anything like that. I mean, I thought that it was funny that he kind of was waltzing around the crowd during a women's match. You could have had him kind of wander around ringside during a women's match.
Right.
Like, what the hell is this guy doing out here? It totally would have played into the Drifter gimmick, so I'm looking forward to see what they do with him. I haven't been impressed with Raw's booking basically since the draft, so I guess cross your fingers and hope that they turn it around. I'm not convinced, but one of the bigger names to move to Raw, which I was absolutely shocked by, was Bray Wyatt. And I think you kind of know how I feel about it, so I'll let you lead off.
Sure, I know that you're really sour on it. I know there are some good reasons to be sour, especially when we talk about how stacked the top of the card is, and Bray Wyatt finally got his opportunity to win, you know, to hold the title. And it was short-lived. It was just over a month. And you hate to think that Bray Wyatt, hopefully this isn't his only title run, because after going from AJ, then Cena wins it just to get that 16 number. Bray wins it at Elimination Chamber, and now he feels like a transitional champion. And you want him at some point to be a legitimate champion that holds the belt for a while, and you wonder if that opportunity is even going to present itself while he's on Raw. So from that standpoint, he's better suited on SmackDown. The problem with Bray Wyatt is, I feel like no matter which show he's on, you end up asking the age-old Bray Wyatt question of, who's he going to feud with and go over? Because on Raw, it looks grim, but really what should have happened is I know why WWE did this, but if I were booking, I would have given him a WrestleMania win. Like, I would have had him...
I agree.
I would have had him beat Orton. And that's been the story of Bray Wyatt's career. Like, when he had his thing with John Cena, a lot of people thought that was going to be the coronation of Bray Wyatt, and it wasn't. And then, then he faced The Undertaker, but it was too late. The streak was broken. That torch wasn't available to pass, and the fans would have really hated it if Taker lost twice in a row. I mean, if somebody's going to take the heat, for beating Taker, pass the torch, man. And he could have been a he could have been a heel with a lot of heat for a while, but at the end of the day, he has all the talent in the world. So
it could have been the torch of Undertaker.
Right.
Pass it on, man.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I just feel like no matter what show, because he was kind of a transitional champion, whether he stayed on SmackDown or he went to Raw, those questions were going to be there. So, and I'll illustrate it by saying the one thing that I'm optimistic about in terms of him going to Raw is obviously they'll have a bigger audience. So hopefully he gets booked in a way where more people realize what he's capable of. There are a couple potential feuds that would be really good. The problem is you just don't see Bray going over because he's already teased a thing with Finn. Oh, well, when I'm done with Randy, because he's obviously going to lose the rematch to Randy Orton. By the way, Payback's card is looking really boring.
Yeah, that's one of the big parts that I hate, because you basically gave away the finish at Payback. Bray Wyatt, he's not going to bring the WWE Championship to Raw, so obviously Orton's going to win. The other thing, it's cool for him to get into a feud with Finn Balor, and it's something new, but you had more options for new feuds with him on SmackDown Live. Like, we haven't seen him feud with AJ, which would have been awesome. Something with him and Nakamura would have been awesome.
Yeah.
We've seen him feud before already with Roman. We've already seen him feud with Dean. Like, do we really need to go those routes again? Like, I just feel like it was completely unnecessary. It wasn't needed. And much like The Miz, he's going to be stuck behind a bunch of other guys where he's not going to get that chance to be in the top spot again. And then the thing I don't like about him feuding with Balor, which we'll see when that takes place now that Balor's hurt again, but both of those guys need a win, so who's going to get it? I mean, I don't trust that Bray's going to get it. It's probably going to be Finn.
Yeah, and we're probably back to eventually kind of boring face champion Orton, which is another reason why Bray should have gone over. And then, yeah, you mentioned AJ Styles in terms of like the build up to SummerSlam, because AJ's so over right now that
and he's clearly a babyface.
Right?
Now,
Yeah, so he's clearly a babyface. So in terms of like the build to something like SummerSlam, like a heel Wyatt with a huge WrestleMania win under his belt against an over the moon babyface AJ Styles, that would have been awesome.
Yep, I think another great feud that they will not be able to tap into now would have been Bray Wyatt and Shane McMahon. I think that something like that would have had a lot of potential, and much like Divas clothing in the Attitude Era, it's been stripped away from us.
Yes, it has.
So we'll keep moving on. Another move for Raw, which kind of coincides with SmackDown Live, so we'll touch on that. We have Kalisto moving over to Raw. So when I first heard about this, I was initially excited, because while a lot of people said, oh, well, he's going to move into the Cruiserweight division, which I don't want to see happen, which I'll get into, I thought that this inevitably meant that the Lucha Dragons were going to be reuniting, and that's a team that I don't think ever should have been split up. Obviously, Kalisto on his own has not worked. Sin Cara on his own has definitely not worked. So I think that they could have added some depth to the tag team division on Raw, which is a little bit heavy on the babyface side, but you could have made that work one way or another. But then, of course, Sin Cara gets drafted to SmackDown Live, which coinciding with Kurt Hawkins is probably one of the most irrelevant moves of the entire shakeup. So to me, that inevitably means Kalisto, he's got to be going to the Cruiserweight division, which they don't need any more guys in the Cruiserweight division. They have damn near 20 guys on 205 Live. You have multiple Hispanic masked superstars, so you don't need another one, which, again, this spells trouble for our boy Lince Dorado, of course, if that is the case. So while it makes sense for Kalisto on some levels to go to the Cruiserweight division, just because it hasn't worked out for him as a solo on SmackDown Live, really at all. I mean, he was kind of hot when he was U.S. champ, feuding with Alberto Del Rio, but other than that, he hasn't really done much of anything, and I think that it was a really big missed opportunity to not put the Lucha Dragons back together, give yourself some more depth in the tag team division, and then Sin Cara moving to SmackDown, like, what's the point?
Yeah, that's what I wrote about. I said his value is in the tag team division at this point, and you basically said what I wrote in the column that comes out tomorrow, but if you're listening to this, came out yesterday. That's where their value is. The singles run didn't really pan out, and they can always go to that well in terms of like Kalisto going to 205 Live. They don't need to do it right now.
There's so many guys on 205 Live that are not being used right now. Like, when's the last time we saw Tajiri on TV? It's been forever, you know? And you got other guys that are going to be coming back, like Cedric Alexander, who's going to take up a spot. You only get 3 matches at most on 205 Live every week, so...
Yeah, and so his value is there because 205 Live doesn't need freshening up. And if it does...
It certainly doesn't need any more baby faces, that's for sure. That's the whole reason you just turned TJ Perkins heel.
Right, yeah, because you really had few other options, and some people were kind of sour on him, so it makes sense to turn him heel. Yeah, his value would be depth in the tag team division, and you can always have that in your back pocket where if you lose a bunch of talent on 205 Live or it's feeling a little stale, which it's nowhere near feeling stale because of how many guys have started to develop their character, and there's so many stories that haven't been told. It was questionable when Neville made the move, but 205 Live, other than the Brian Kendrick, they needed a brilliant heel to rule the roost, and as much as I've always loved Neville, I never even knew what he had in him.
No, he totally blew my expectations.
Like, he's the man. So, I mean, that worked, but like you said, they don't need another masked babyface.
Yeah.
And by the way, Sin Cara, if you weren't going to put the Lucha Dragons back together, why the hell is Sin Cara even on the payroll anymore?
I would agree with that. I mean, every year around this time, people expect a bunch of departures, which we've already seen Simon Gotch go, which kind of was his own doing. Reportedly, he requested his release. I don't know exactly how much I buy about that after it came out this week that he caused another stir backstage, which, ironically enough, was the day before he was released, so we'll see on that. But, yeah, I'm totally with you on Kalisto. I think missed opportunity on not putting the Lucha Dragons back together, who were pretty damn over. So, again, I don't see the point. So speaking of the tag team division, the addition on the red brand, which I would have picked a different team, but we have Heath Slater and Rhino moving to Raw. So personally, I just spoke about how Raw is pretty babyface heavy in terms of tag teams. So the only thing I really have to say about this is I would have moved over like the Ascension.
Yeah, they're the ones that need the opportunity more. I didn't expect Rhino to be around this long, honestly. He and Slater were over when they won the championships, and then, they'd kind of run their course, and, Heath Slater really would have been better suited if, and this is absolutely no offense to Rhino. I mean, guy is, he's established himself as who he is, but I thought for a long time that Rhino was going to bow out, and then maybe Heath Slater could get a little bit of a singles push and challenge for the IC belt on SmackDown, which of course is no longer on SmackDown because Slater is entertaining and he has been a little bit underrated. None of that has happened. They faded into the background a little bit, so this is kind of a nothing move to me.
Yeah, like I said, there's so many babyface teams on Raw that I don't really see why you add another one unless you're going to turn someone like, it seems like Cesaro and Sheamus, there's a pretty good chance that they might turn here soon. But you also lost another heel team in the process, which we'll get into, so I don't know. Just another in this long list that I don't quite understand. So, of course, there was a couple of additions to the women's division, which, I'll be honest, this is a couple of moves that I'm totally fine with, and I think are going to be good. So, of course, we saw Alexa Bliss and Mickie James both show up on Monday Night Raw. I think this is essentially what they were looking to do with the shakeup and keep things fresh. I'm totally fine with Alexa moving, especially considering who SmackDown Live got in return. And then there's been a real kind of lack of baby faces in the Raw women's division for the last few months, really. It's basically been only Bayley and Sasha. I know you got Dana Brooke, but she's still kind of
Building.
She's still kind of building, and she still needs some work in the ring, which I'm sure a lot of people will bash me for this, but Alexa is not the greatest in the ring either. She just kind of hides it so well with the strength of her character. So I thought that it was very smart to move Mickie James as kind of like, I guess you could call a package deal.
Yeah, this is the one in terms of if you're going to freshen anything up. When I think of both women's divisions now, yeah, I love the move. One thing I wasn't going to like, there were rumors that Sasha was also going to move to SmackDown, and it's like Sasha and Charlotte. They had one of the feuds of the year last year, and it bled right into WrestleMania, and it was awesome. And
they need to be separated.
They need an excuse to have some time apart. They need an excuse that is more than just storyline because, as we've seen, it is almost impossible for those two not to be intertangled. And, people were starting to kind of go, okay, we've seen this before, and there will absolutely be more Charlotte-Sasha encounters of some sort down the line, but they need some time away from each other. So when they did not move Sasha and they moved Tamina, I was loved glad. It. Yeah. And I loved that introduction. We were talking about it before we started, but I loved when they brought Tamina out and they said she's a second-generation superstar. Her father is a Hall of Famer. And as soon as they said it, I'm like, I knew what was happening. I knew it was Tamina.
Really? I didn't catch up on that. You got me on that one.
No, because and this is the other thing we were talking about. It reminded me, because all the rumors were about Charlotte, and it reminded me of when all the rumors were about, somebody coming to Raw a couple years ago, and they said that it was a multi-platform superstar who's an actor and a this and a that and a former world champion, and they brought out and everybody's expecting Chris Jericho, and they bring out The Miz. It was hilarious.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say about the women's division is a lot of people have been calling for a Sasha heel turn, and I think that it will happen at some point, but I really believe you need to establish another strong babyface in the Raw women's division before that happens. So let's hold off on that for a couple of months, at least, until, you can really get someone like, hopefully someone like Dana can really kind of establish herself a little bit better, or maybe Mickie can kind of get her footing under her a little more, because once she turned on Alexa, it hasn't really quite worked out that well, so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I really like the women's moves. Like, in terms of the divisions, I think the women's divisions are the ones I'm happiest with.
Yeah, you couldn't call up from NXT to help freshen those up, because NXT still can't afford to lose anybody. I know everyone's still saying Asuka, but I mean it's not time. They can't afford to lose her yet. They just can't. Bottom line, I'll stone cold it. Bottom line. All All right, so another swap. While we'll be finishing up Raw here, is we had a 1-for-1 trade on the commentary table. David Otunga is heading to Raw eventually. He just picked up a movie role, so his debut is going to be a little delayed. In exchange for Byron Saxton on SmackDown Live, and I guess the one question about this I have for you, Doug, is, do you really give a shit?
Nope. I was just gonna say, once you went to me, I was like, I could care less.
Yeah, I don't see what this does except take away the satisfaction that I get and the laughter that I get from hearing Corey Graves kind of needle Byron Saxton. I don't get it.
And then on the other side, JBL's kind of walking on thin ice, in terms of, being JBL's always had that reputation of being a backstage bully, an in-ring bully.
He was behaving himself this week. And
he really
wasn't picking on Byron, so...
And by behaving himself, I really think he was just going out of his way because he is the heel commentator. The heel commentator is supposed to give the other guys grief, and so he should be giving it to him. I mean, think about some of the hilarious things a guy like Bobby Heenan would say to his partners. But yeah, no, he not only was behaving himself, he was almost going out of his way to do that. Byron Saxton, he can call the action pretty good. He's just kind of nerdy and boring to me,
Which is why I'm going to miss Graves kind of giving him the business. We will no longer be able to hear great lines from Corey Graves like, Byron, do you know what you and Bailey have in common? The only meaningful relationships you have are with inflatable people. So that's pretty unfortunate. I'm not really happy that they took away that. I didn't really see the point of swapping up commentary. It's wasn't really needed at all, which coincides with pretty much how I felt about most of this. So on to the SmackDown side of things. Of course, we touched on this a little bit. Once Ambrose moved over to Raw, it was basically inevitable that the United States Championship, which is held by Kevin Owens, was moving to SmackDown. And if you remember this, Doug, I called it before it happened. I said the biggest move or the biggest acquisition that SmackDown will get will probably be Kevin Owens, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and Kevin Owens is a brilliant performer, so I have no doubts that he'll do his thing and he'll be good. I just felt like Raw was home for him. He was the Universal Champion for the majority of the time since the belt's inception. Of course, Finn Balor was the inaugural champion, but you know what I mean. He and Jericho really carried Raw for the back end of 2016, and but again, it makes Payback so boring because
the stipulation, if nobody heard it on SmackDown Live, is technically Owens is not part of the SmackDown roster yet. The winner of his match between him and Jericho will be a part of the SmackDown Live roster, but we all know Jericho is leaving right after Payback, so obviously he's not going to win the championship and then be gone for a month and a half. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Like, why would they have Daniel Bryan do that? Make that kind of stipulation? I mean, I already didn't like the move to begin with, but that makes really, really no sense because...
That's pretty much the theme of this whole shakeup.
But you talked about, well, look, if you just said, okay, Kevin Owens is on SmackDown, he's the United States Champion, the end, but Chris Jericho's still due his rematch, so we're still going to have that match, and maybe, because Jericho really, he wasn't on TV, he wasn't assigned a show, he could still challenge for that United States Championship almost as a freelancer, but because he's going to be piecing out in May...
Especially now that we know AJ Styles is the #1 contender for the U.S. title after that, so obviously they're not going to revisit Jericho and AJ because Jericho's leaving.
Right.
So it's going to be Owens.
And you didn't need to do a #1 contenders match 3 weeks before a pay-per-view that has a very obvious finish. But if they didn't even assign Jericho and Kevin Owens was definitely going to be on SmackDown and they were going to do the match anyway because maybe Jericho could wrestle on either show. I mean, they could have done 100 things where you would at least have the option, and because this is something you said, you could at least have the option of Jericho, getting a big pop for getting a win at Payback, and then he just drops it 2 nights later, again. But now the winner joins the SmackDown roster. It couldn't be any more obvious.
There was an absolute softball lobbed up, which, unless you're, I mean, I'm not going to say that because it's not PC, but yeah, I mean, logic, figure it out, people. Obviously, Owens is going over at Payback. A lot of times you can kind of predict what's going to happen with these pay-per-views, but I don't like them just giving away the finish like that. I really...
Especially for the 2 title matches.
Exactly, which are going to be... I'm still expecting Roman and Braun will get added, but other than that, these are the 2 top matches that you're going to be tuning in to see, and they just gave you what was going to happen. So I think I've said this like 20 times already. What's the point?
Right.
Anyway, back to SmackDown Live, coinciding with the addition of Kevin Owens, which, to me, this goes right back to the Charlotte and Sasha thing. Sami Zayn got added to SmackDown Live, which I'm totally fine with, but why can they not just keep him away from Owens for a little while? It just seems so lazy to me that they keep these 2 together, because then they can just throw their hands up and say, oh, we got nothing, let's just throw them back together.
Yeah, I mean...
Not that I have an issue with Sami going to SmackDown, because
right.
The moves on SmackDown were essentially all... like, predictable. Like, we all knew that they were going to happen. So Sami going to SmackDown's been talked about forever. So I'm fine with that part of it, but you didn't need Owens there, too.
Right. I would have been fine if they never swapped champions, but they moved Sami. Sami was the first one that I had included in the column, and in terms of moves that I liked. And the first sentence I wrote was, this one is so obvious it's almost lazy, because ever since the brand extension, people wanted Sami on SmackDown, because traditionally it was the more wrestling-centric show. Ironically, SmackDown has been the show that has had better character development. And we were talking about this earlier in the week, in terms of who Sami Zayn is as a wrestler, and I don't mean like the underdog gimmick, but just who he is as a wrestler beyond that, that space that he occupies, he's got Seth Rollins and Finn Balor ahead of him in terms of getting opportunities for big matches. So it's I think it would be really, really redundant to have Rollins, Balor, and Zayn on the same show, because Zayn would get the short end of the stick.
Here's another thing about SmackDown Live, which it kind of makes sense when you think about this, to move Owens over there, but just look at the top of their card. You have AJ Styles, who just turned babyface. You've got Sami Zayn. You've got Shinsuke Nakamura. Who are your top heels on SmackDown?
That's why the Miz shouldn't have moved.
You got Kevin Owens, and I mean, I like Baron Corbin. I'm a big fan of Baron Corbin. But who else do you have? You've got no one on the quote-unquote dark side. You literally have nobody.
Yeah, the Miz shouldn't have moved.
Who the hell is Sami gonna work with outside of Baron Corbin and Kevin Owens?
Right, I can live with Bray, but the Miz, obviously there are pros and cons for Bray on either side. But The Miz absolutely should have stayed on SmackDown.
Yep. Absolutely agree. Okay, so on to the tag team divisions for SmackDown. The first edition, which a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me. I've always been a closet fan of theirs, and they've always been saddled with poor gimmicks. Was the debut, I guess not necessarily debut, the SmackDown Live debut of the what looked to be newly aggressive Shining Stars.
Yep, this one I'm cautiously, I actually included it in my I'm okay with, but I put the disclaimer that I am cautious about it, because if this means that they're dropping their crappy gimmick, they are, I mean, after Los Matadores, who the hell in the back thought that a couple of timeshare salesmen were going to be anything more than squash guys?
You know what probably happened is someday some guy probably knocked on Vince McMahon's door trying to sell him a timeshare, and he was like, man, that's really annoying. You know what? That would make a great gimmick.
Right. But even as annoying heels, like you can't even pull it off. It gets old so fast. So yeah, like I just don't understand who on the creative team thought they could be anything more than squash guys as the gimmick that they have. So if it means that they're dropping the lame gimmick, if it means they're going to be called, Primo and Epico, and it means that they're going to be nasty and more aggressive, and it looks like they're going to be working with Alpha, as long as they're taken seriously, I can get behind it. So I said
they're incredible in the ring.
Yeah.
I mean, that's never ever been the issue with these guys.
So I am cautiously optimistic about this one.
I like the move. You've essentially lost 3 tag teams from the SmackDown Live tag team division. Only added 2. We'll talk about the second one later on. But with the injury to Zack Ryder, you no longer have the Hype Bros. Simon Gotch got released, so you no longer have the Vaudevillains, and then Slater and Rhino moved over to Raw. So I still think that you need to do something else with the tag team division. They haven't really been showcased that greatly on SmackDown Live of late. Although the Usos and American Alpha had an awesome match this week and showed why they should be having at least one match for the tag team division every single week on SmackDown Live, and there's not really any need to not do that at this point in time now that we're away from WrestleMania. So like I said, I've always been a fan of their in-ring work, the Shining Stars, and we'll see if they can be taken seriously. I had the same hope for the Ascension after the draft, and it didn't really happen. So that's another team that I think needs to be built up, especially after losing the Vaudevillains, who weren't really doing much. But either way, they at least occupied a spot, and Breezango is a comedy act. So you got to have some heel teams outside of the Usos to be taken seriously.
Yeah, that's why I said cautiously optimistic, because when they did the draft, I had high hopes for the SmackDown tag team division, and like you said, the Ascension, but also even Breezango, because those guys are hilarious. Like I want them to keep being hilarious, and I don't want their gimmick to change. I just want them to be more taken more seriously in the ring.
Yeah, they need to at least pick up a victory here and there over somebody. So on the same token, another guy who is moving to SmackDown Live, who I think needs to be taken more seriously, and I actually like him moving to SmackDown Live because I think he's really going to have the opportunity to do that, since the mid-card on SmackDown Live has been absolutely gutted, would be Jinder Mahal, who has continued to impress me ever since he's returned. Obviously, he's in tremendous physical condition. I know a lot of people are like, oh, he's on the juice or whatever. I'm going to call bullshit. Because if you go back and watch some of his older stuff from his first run with the company, he wasn't quite as ripped as he is now, but he's basically got the same exact physique, but he's shredded some water weight or something. You can tell that he's dieting and just working out harder. Anytime a guy shows up and he's in great condition, everyone immediately is like, oh, steroids. So I don't necessarily buy into that. So, of course, he delivered a pretty stiff shot to Finn Balor, which caused the concussion. Doesn't look like there's going to be any repercussions from that. I would like for him to not keep jobbing out to someone like Mojo Rawley, which I think they only revisited that part of it this week because they were in Boston and Gronk was in the crowd, so they kind of went for the cheap pop with Gronk getting involved again. But I would like to see Jinder do a little bit more, and I think that he's got a really good chance to do that.
Well, in terms of the accusations about substances that he's using and the fact that he's more ripped now than he was,
what? He would be caught. He would be suspended.
He came back not too long ago, and when you talk about WWE getting more serious about drugs and stuff, obviously if somebody's coming in through the door, they're going to be tested. And I'm sitting here looking at the wall, and I'm looking at the autograph from Matt Sydal, a guy who's best known for his WWE stint as Evan Bourne, And, you know, he's in his late 30s now, and I just saw him at an independent show last month. He's in his late 30s, and the dude is so, like, no homo. The dude is so fit and so ripped. It's ridiculous. And I don't...
Let's put it this way. They would not be holding Kurt Angle to trying to pass a physical and, like, the possibility of keeping him out of the ring, but they would allow Jinder Mahal to come in all juiced up. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, like Seidel, like not an ounce of body fat on the guy. He's so
Granted,
ripped.
he only weighs about the same as me anyway, and
Right.
he's like, I'm 6'1", and he's probably like 5'8".
But I was gonna say, like, I don't suspect a thing in terms of any kind of foul play in terms of his fitness, and I don't with Jinder. And Jinder's been addressing it on social media, like he's been addressing the accusations. And honestly, if he was even concerned that he could get caught for something, that he wouldn't be addressing it publicly because it will bring attention to the company and they might test him. You know, so I don't buy that. SmackDown, like you said, is short on heels, so this could be his opportunity, and I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, the mid card for heels is a little clouded. I don't know that I see him kind of elevating to a top of the card status. But in terms of the mid carders for baby faces, you really only have Mojo and Ty Dillinger, to be honest. Other than that, you got Jinder, you got Dolph Ziggler, you got Baron Corbin, who can kind of float in between there. Another guy who moved to SmackDown that we'll get into in a couple minutes here. But yeah, I would like to see him do a little bit more, and I think that he has a good chance to do that. So the only question is, who's he going to work with outside of Dillinger and Mojo? So somebody else is going to have to step up, and Aiden English too, who looks to be getting a push, and who will definitely be a heel. He's kind of taken on his old drama king persona of singing and stuff that he used in NXT. So yeah, the future looks like it could be good for Jinder. Of course, for the women's division, we touched on this a little bit already. There was a nice little swerve with Tamina coming in, which I'm glad you saw that coming, because I had completely forgotten about that, and I figured that it was Charlotte who came in after that. And the only thing I would say about the SmackDown Live women's division now is they have the same problem that Raw has been having before, where they're loaded with heels. The only baby faces you have are your champion Naomi and Becky Lynch. Outside of that, they're all heels, so I think somebody's going to have to turn, and Tamina does not ever work as a babyface. It never has worked, so you can't use her.
Well, and this might be a really good thing for Naomi, because it could be indicative that Naomi might have a long run because she has so many people that she can work with. And maybe long term somebody's going to have to turn, but in the meantime, it probably means good things for the Glow Queen.
Yeah, the only one that I can see like turning and having it work would be Natalya. Yeah, but it hasn't really been. Has it really been long enough for her to turn back to babyface already?
She can be the Big Show of the women's division.
She would be highly offended if she heard you say that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm like we talked about earlier. I really have not. I mean,
there's another option that we will talk about here shortly. So.
Oh yes, that is a good one too. But yeah, overall, I'm happy with the women's moves, and I really have nothing more to say. Charlotte is even though she's not the champion and Naomi's the champion, and I hope that Naomi has a good run. Charlotte is a new mountain to climb on SmackDown, and Alexa Bliss, like you mentioned, she has a few still kind of growing pains or concerns in the ring, but she is such a good character, and Raw is kind of all about that.
I don't want to see Charlotte come in and immediately go into a title program, because eventually she's going to take it. Like, let her feud with like Becky or something
what I was
first,
thinking.
And let somebody else kind of get a shot at the championship, whether it's Carmella or Natalya at this point.
Yeah, Naomi has so many options, and you can...
they could even do something with Tamina too that I think would work just because of the family ties.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So, no, I think I think both women's divisions are healthy.
Healthy as a horse. Healthy as a Lillian Garcia.
Hey, remember RC Cola?
Not really, but only because we've got this, we always have something on the network playing in the background, and today I went with a episode of SmackDown Live from the Invasion angle in 2001, so RC Cola, no, not really. If ever I was going to, like, a soda machine and that was an option, I would have went with, like, Sam's Choice over that.
My grandfather used to buy RC.
Oh my God.
I haven't seen that.
That's what it makes me think of. That and, like, I feel like it's lowbrow, like, people like that, like,
Yeah.
Moxie should be drinking RC Cola.
Yeah, it was not the best soda.
All right, we've got a couple more to get through here before we wrap things up. And, one of those guys who I alluded to earlier, which I think could really fill a spot and will fill a spot at the top of the card on the heel side for SmackDown Live once he returns from injury, is the Bulgarian Brute Rusev.
I love the fact that Rusev is going to SmackDown.
I think you had to make this move.
Yeah. So Rusev is really interesting because obviously he was the foreign heel, or, well, you know, he's been the foreign monster heel, which is an age-old gimmick in wrestling. He pulled it off really well. The irony about Rusev is he showed his depth and range in some really, really bad feuds. Because when the whole thing with Dolph Ziggler and Summer Rae was going on, that was an awful story, but Rusev was showing a lot of range. And then when the thing with Enzo was going on, a lot of people were confused because you know that technically Rusev is the heel, but when you think about the dynamic of that story and somebody who would otherwise be, going after your significant other, of course, Enzo did the thing, oh, I'm not so sure, but...
I mean, it's not like me hitting on your wife, Doug.
But I'm going to go ahead and do it. You look at that story and you're like, wait a minute. How is Rusev the heel here?
How is he in the wrong in this situation?
Yeah, and so... But in those two really, really crappy stories, in terms of him cutting promos and just doing work, it showed that he's so much more and can be so much more than just a foreign monster, one-dimensional heel. And I still go back to his feud with Roman Reigns, which I was a big fan of. And I thought Rusev was cutting some great promos when he was feuding with Reigns. And SmackDown has definitely been the place for story and character development. So this is probably the move I'm most excited about.
I agree 100%. If I had to pick one, this would be the one that I think... I talked a little bit about I think this gives a good opportunity for Jinder, but out of everybody, I think this presents the biggest opportunity for Rusev to really move up and establish himself as the main event player that we all know he can be, and showed that he could be. It was unfortunate, his initial run really kind of, I don't want to say buried, because that's an overly used term, but once he lost to Cena and his undefeated streak was over a couple of years ago, it really hurt him a lot. So I'm definitely looking forward to his return. It looks like he's not going to be with Lana anymore, which we'll touch on in a second here. So yeah, the future is very, very bright for Rusev as long as they use him correctly, which I think they're going to have to, because he's going to have to... He's going to have to fill one of those top spots along with Baron Corbin and Kevin Owens as one of the top heels on SmackDown Live. So, like I said, we'll touch on Lana, who it looks like she's finally going to be competing in the ring full-time. And from the looks of it, it looks like she's going to be a babyface, which kind of makes sense because the crowd has always really been fond of her for obvious reasons.
Even... Oh, what a spear.
It's a gore, Doug.
It's a gore. Sorry, it's a gore. Jesus.
Paul Heyman would be pissed at you.
He would.
But yeah, I didn't quite understand the vignette for Lana. I don't know if that's supposed to be kind of like her new character, but I could definitely see her occupying a babyface spot on SmackDown Live to help even the odds up. The only question I have, which is the reason why she has not really competed in the ring other than at WrestleMania and on some NXT live events, is can she hold up physically?
Yeah, she's gonna. You might as well roll with her as a babyface because even when Rusev was in his most monstrous heel, state, the crowd was chanting for Lana. She's so over with the crowd. Roll with it, especially if you need baby faces. I haven't seen. I know that she's worked house shows, and Have you seen any video of her working?
Not really. The only time I ever saw her really work was at WrestleMania 31, and she was in, what was it like? It was like an 8-woman tag match, so she was hardly in the ring. We know her background, so she's definitely athletic. But yeah, like I said, my only concern is can she hold up physically?
Yeah, so I have no idea because I haven't seen her work. If she can work to a sufficient level, because even that WrestleMania, I mean, that was a while ago, and if
the character is strong enough where if she's kind of weak in the ring, they can kind of cover it with that.
Kind of like Alexa Bliss right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, should be a great babyface, so.
All right, the final move of the Superstar Shakeup. Another pretty big move and a huge addition to what will most likely end up being the face of SmackDown Live's tag team division, the New Day heading to the Blue brand. For me, I think it's inevitable that they're gonna kind of give some of these other teams the rub that really need the help over on that side, such as American Alpha. But the question that I have is, are we going to see a couple of, or even just one of these guys kind of break out into their own and help fill out the mid-card over on the SmackDown Live side of things?
I hope so. I don't think it'll happen immediately. The New Day, I don't think it was any mistake when they were named the hosts of WrestleMania. They had their very long title run. Obviously, they still work matches. But they kind of are like ambassadors. Like I know that WWE has an actual ambassador program. I mean, they're kind of on-screen ambassadors at this point who now occasionally work matches. Does that make any sense?
No, it totally makes sense. Their I guess mainstream profile has become so huge. Like, they're really one of the faces of the company at this point. Personally, I would like to see Big E kind of break out on his own, but still be a part of the New Day because they're just so over and they sell so much merch that it's hard to imagine WWE breaking them up entirely. And when that does happen, Kofi has said that he probably would retire at that point. So I'd like to see the group kind of stay together, but be able to work as solo competitors as well as in the tag team division.
Yeah, I don't think it's happening anytime soon. I think they're gonna.
I mean, it's gonna be a couple more weeks at least before Kofi's back from injury, anyway.
Yeah, and they'll be the microphone kings who give rubs to the tag team division for a while, and yeah, now that they're switching brands, you're
gonna need them to fill spots in that mid card.
Absolutely,
now, anyway.
and then Big E can probably get a bit of a heavyweight push, and Woods would be a brilliant heel in the mid card at some point. So
yeah, if any of them are gonna be heel, it would have to be Woods,
right? Because he's such a good talker.
Exactly, he's got the gift of gab, as Enzo Amore would say. So that's the obvious choice. If Kofi were to stick around, I don't really know what you would do with him aside from going back to his old gimmick, which would just be a nostalgia act, and I don't really want to see that happen. We've seen how hilarious Big E has been, which was kind of a point of contention and something everybody was really calling for during his last singles run that really faded out. So I'd like to see him kind of stay on, I guess, the good side of things. So yeah, there's a lot of options for New Day, and this is one of, again, the very, very few moves of the draft, which was predictable. We all saw this coming, but this one I like. So I think there's only going to be positive things out of New Day going to Raw. They pretty much exhausted all their options, or going to SmackDown. They exhausted all their options on Raw at this point.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's a great big we'll see. I think after the draft in July, most of us walked away going, oh my God, Raw is so stacked, SmackDown is so screwed. And then SmackDown had a multi-month run of kind of being the better show overall, and even if they weren't the better show of the week, I know that you write this a lot, they've had better main events.
Every week, every single week, they have consistently put on great main events. Again, this week was no different with AJ and Corbin and Sammy. So again, I feel like Raw didn't need all the talent that they got, but if anything, SmackDown Live has shown that they are able to build new stars and kind of make people relevant. We've seen it with Baron Corbin, even though people have argued with me about that for whatever reason. I don't know, I guess alcohol's a hell of a drug, but I should say cocaine's a hell of a drug in honor of Charlie Murphy, because I was a huge Chappelle Show fan. But yeah, I mean, I'm still overall not happy about this taking place in general, but if there is one positive, SmackDown Live is able to build better storylines, so they're gonna have to now. So they're really gonna be put to the test, and we will see what happens.
It's a big we'll see. I thought it was way too soon, but hey, you never know. Maybe I'll eat crow 6 months from now.
Well, I don't like to eat crow, so hopefully that won't happen. I mean, I'm not good at coming up with alternative ideas all the time, but when somebody comes up, like, shows me, like, hey, this is gonna happen, I feel like I'm pretty good at being like, alright, well, if you do this, this is what you have to worry about, this is gonna be the problems, and a lot of the time I'm pretty right. I hate to toot my own toot my own horn. I hate to toot my own horn, but Roddy Piper once said, who better knows the tune, so...
Yeah, alright. We shall see.
Alright, Doug, that's going to wrap it up for us this week. Of course, you already talked about your column, looking at some of the moves that you liked and did not like in the Doug's Day device. Hopefully everybody likes the play on words there, so if you haven't checked out that, definitely hashtag get on top and give that a look, and yeah, we will catch you next time around. Alright, everybody, that was our show for this week. My and Doug Berrill's review of the Superstar Shakeup. So hopefully we'll have to see what happens with the whole kind of roster moves in the future. I'm hoping that it wasn't a huge mistake. I'm not feeling too good about it right now, but only time will tell. So before we get you out of here, all the usual plugs. Be sure to hashtag get on top with TopRopeReport.com for all the latest and greatest news, live results, our pay-per-view flash every Saturday morning looking at the timeline and history of WCW, WWE, and eventually we'll get into ECW pay-per-views. That's every Saturday morning, brought to you courtesy of myself and Mr. Doug Berrill. Of course, we have our columns, my column, The Flying Elbow, Doug's, the Doug's Day device, and then Anthony's bi-weekly column, Mr. Anthony DeMeo, which is the Anthony Asylum. So definitely check that stuff out. If you'd like to follow TopRopeReport.com on social media, we're on Twitter at TRR Wrestling. I am also on Twitter at TRR_EAmes. And you can follow Doug on Twitter at TRR_Doug. TopRopeReport.com is also on Facebook at TopRopeReport.com with no dot. And we are also on Instagram at TopRopeReport.com with no dot. Before we get you out of here, I want to give a shout out to our friends over at the Main Event Podcast, Big Bad Harmon and Johnny Fashion. I was a guest on their show this week, which we broke down some of the worst gimmicks in professional wrestling history with a little bit of a, I guess you could call it a fantasy tournament, kind of giving our opinions about some of the worst of all time. So definitely be sure to check that out. That's the Main Event Podcast, which is now available on iTunes, and you can also find that on Podbean. And definitely be sure to go back and check out past episodes of the Top of the Morning podcast. Subscribe to us on iTunes. We are also on SoundCloud, YouTube, and Podcruncher. And be on the lookout for future episodes of Top of the Morning. So as always, my friends, we will catch you guys later on. And just remember, it's not how hard you get knocked down, but whether or not you can kick out.